Hello and welcome to today's web conference. You've joined us for Dynamics 365 Fast Track Tech Talk. Today's topic, driving user adoption. Presenting with us today from Microsoft, we have Chris Knowles, who is a Senior Fast Track Program Manager. Now it's my pleasure to turn you over. Chris, you now have the floor.
Thank you, Debbie. Hi, everyone. As Debbie said, my name's Chris Knowles, and I am a Senior Fast Track Program Manager here with Microsoft in the Fast Track program. This is the Fast Track for Dynamics 365 Driving User Adoption Tech Talk. So our objectives for today, we're going to talk about usage and adoption overview in terms of how usage and adoption is important. We're going to discuss some concepts of adoption guidance. We're going to talk about how you can measure how your adoption is going. Provide you with some additional adoption resources, and then of course we'll cover question and answer at the end of the session. We expect this session to run somewhere between 1 and 2 hours. We hope that at the end of the session you have a good understanding of the key areas that impact your usage and adoption, that you will have a better idea of how to measure active usage in your system, and gain an awareness of the available training and adoption resources. And today we're kind of targeting this towards business project managers and technical project managers in the hopes that as you go and develop your adoption plans for your implementations, that you will be able to leverage some of this information. We'll start first with talking about an overview of usage and adoption. One of the things that's key in any implementation of CRM is end user adoption. It is absolutely critical that this is something that's focused on from the very beginning in the planning and even pre-planning stages to ensure that you have a successful implementation. To do this, it requires a structured and effective change management process. And when we talk about change management, what we're really referring to is not change management in terms of a project where you change scope or you may change particulars or you change functionality. We're talking about how you manage change throughout your organization, or organizational change management. And it's a very different method, it's a very different philosophy, and it's something that requires very targeted skill sets for people who really understand how to manage change out into an organization. Also, we'll talk some about key success metrics and KPIs and how those can translate to successful adoption. So when you're looking for how do you get a successful adoption, there are several steps that you can follow. The first one is plan. And if I had my choice, I would probably have plan all the way around this diagram, because you're always planning and you're always replanning, because to make sure that your adoption is successful, you have to be fluid in how you address it. You have to be aware of what your users' current concerns are and how the system that you're planning to implement will change or address those concerns. Then you're going to want to be able to begin to execute your plan to help drive adoption throughout the organization once the system is ready to deploy. And actually, this is something that continues all the way through your implementation cycle. You'll then want to periodically measure how your adoption is going and how you're aligning to your key performance metrics. And again, you refine your plan, and that's why it's cyclical in terms of always adjusting and executing, measuring, and refining as you go through the process. So in terms of the types of guidance that the Fast Track program is looking to help people understand, one of the things that we've realized in the Fast Track program is that our customers expand the gamut of possible customers that you could have in the Dynamics 365 space. We have customers who have partners. We have customers who don't have partners. We have customers who have customer success managers that are also a Microsoft provided resource that can help you with this type of approach as well. And we have customers who don't have those. And so in seeing this, we decided that as part of the Fast Track program, in addition to the more heavily technically oriented topics that we wanted to address with our customers, we wanted to start to look at some of the softer sides of an implementation. And adoption, we think, is one of the ones that's most critical, because that typically is the number one area where people perceive that it's a successful implementation or not. So there are 5 key areas that we look at when we talk about providing guidance for user adoption. The first one is business value, and this is important because really this is where you start to look at your business strategy. This happens in the pre-planning stage, even pre-envision, where you begin to develop your cost-benefit analysis and look at other things. So you define your business strategy and goals. Along with processes that you're going to use, program governance, those types of things, the success KPIs, and of course realistic outcomes. What are your realistic outcomes for your usage? What are you expecting from your users? What types of changes are you expecting to happen in terms of the implementation? Another area that we're going to talk about is data and functionality, and this is where you want to make sure that the business processes that are implemented meet the user's expectations with regards to the data that they're going to see, the line of business system integrations that may be part of their daily process and work, security in terms of whether or not there's information is visible, how they're able to report on the information that they're handling, and those types of things. We'll also talk about usability. And this is really focusing on the user experience. You want to make sure that your user experiences are consistent and that they are available across all delivery models. So, for example, from the web client or in the browser, when the users are using the system as part of Outlook, their mobile experience or mobile and tablet experience. So those are the types of things that we'll talk about with usability. Another area is performance. And this is where you want to make sure that the performance that the system is delivering to the end users is as optimal as you can make it based on everything that you are doing as part of your application and part of your user experience. You also want to set realistic expectations with your end user community with regards to your specific implementation and the types of performance that they can expect. And it's just as an example here, a lot of people focus on going to a web browser, for example, and going to Google or going to Bing or going to a number of places where it's just a website, and they really need to understand that you're not accessing a website with Dynamics. You're really accessing a web user experience to an application. So those are the types of things that you want to highlight there. And then lastly, the last key area is how do you enable adoption enablement. And this is where you really want to leverage effective organization change management processes, as part of end user training, getting your end users engaged in the process. You want to make sure you have executive sponsorship. You do things like develop your power user community and subject matter experts, that your internal help desk is able and prepared, and they understand the application so that they can assist your user community and those types of things. In terms of driving business value, the key area that most people start when they begin a process like this is to develop their strategy and business case. Usually that means the first thing that you're going to want to do is your cost-benefit analysis and your ROI analysis. And this is where you begin to lay out the implementation, the cost of the implementation, the benefits that you're expecting, how do you expect those to be realized? For example, am I expecting a 10% efficiency in the amount of time that it takes to close an opportunity? Or am I looking to increase the number of opportunities that my field sales force can handle in a given period of time, be it a month or whatever financial period you use as a delimiter there. Another thing that you want to make sure as part of your CBA is that you have measurable and realistic success KPIs. So how do you measure these things? How do you measure an increase in productivity? Sometimes efficiency KPIs versus incremental KPIs have different ways of measuring, and those are the types of things that you have to consider when you define these. You also want to implement processes as part of your program to ensure that you're regularly measuring and reporting on these success KPIs so that you can see and track progress and begin to identify where you may need to refine your change management strategy and your user adoption strategy if, for example, something is not achieving the way that you had expected in a period of time. One of the things that really kills a CRM implementation, and I've been doing CRM implementations for over a decade, is that users have, the executives define these KPIs, and then when they say, okay, so in 6 months we expect to see a 15% increase in productivity, and we'll say we're going to measure that by more opportunities per month, as an example. And they'll get to the 6 months and they look at the metrics and they're not there. This comes from the fact that you should beginning as soon as you implement, begin to measure these things and kind of track them as you go along so that you can change your strategies potentially to drive that adoption, which will then drive the usage, which will then hopefully drive the efficiencies that you're looking for. Another thing that you want to make sure that you have as part of your strategy to approaching this from an adoption perspective is that you have good levels of governance as part of the program, and that you have reporting. And the reporting is important because you want to make sure that as you're measuring these KPIs and you're tracking this information, that you're sharing that information with your executives and your sponsorship and your stakeholders so that they understand where they are and they may be able to help you drive some of that change as well. And then lastly, in terms of addressing strategy and from a business case perspective, you also want to be able to, at the beginning, potentially set an expectation that you may need to do some business process reengineering. And the reason for this is a lot of times people who are running sales processes or customer service processes have been running the same processes for a long time on older systems. And the new technology that's available and the technology that's available in Dynamics 365 can really enable some dramatic change in how you approach those business processes. A lot of times users kind of get into the mire of, this is the way I do it. But you sometimes have to set the expectation that you may want to think to use an overused phrase, is to think out of the box, but to really explore how you can change that business process and improve those efficiencies and really improve the way that the user can do what they need to do and help them work more efficiently. And that's something that if it's taken into consideration with user engagement, that's very important. So having said that, the next area is executive sponsorship and business alignment. We want to make sure that you have both your business and IT executive sponsorship actively engaged in your program. This is important because this will always help you to have good alignment, both with communicating to the business and in driving a very balanced view of what the right approach is sometimes to solve a problem when you take into account both the business and IT perspectives. And those are the people responsible for helping kind of arrive at the final decision. You want to make sure that your business subject matter experts are heavily engaged from discovery, functional design, and approval, and functional and acceptance testing. And I bold the word approval here because this is key. You want to make sure that your business users or your subject matter experts, your stakeholders, are agreeing with the functionality that you're planning to deliver and that they accept that and they approve it. And that way you're able to equitably balance as you move forward that type of usability to the user community, and there's much more buy-in and engagement when you have those things. You want to make sure that your end user experience is the primary focus for your design. And the reason that this is important is because if you're always focusing on how your users will perceive it, then ultimately you'll be driven to make sure that that perception is as positive as it can be. You also want to make sure that your steering engagement addresses both business and IT. So when you have steering committees, you want to make sure that your business is represented as well at the appropriate levels of that governance. And then in terms of business value, you want to make sure that you have good user adoption goals. You want to make sure, as I said before, that your KPIs are specific and measurable and that they are tied to end user adoption. You want to make sure that you have a process in place to validate that usage and adoption and provide visibility into those metrics. Then you want to make sure that you have mechanisms for collecting and surfacing end user feedback. You want to make sure that that's important. And then lastly, you want to make sure that you account for, in terms of considering your adoption goals and your overall program plan, of course, that you account for known business impacts. So, for example, a fiscal year end, holidays, significant vacations, and I reference that because some companies will do things like they'll take a week off, they'll do a week shutdown, or they'll take a week off as a company at different points in time during the year, and those things can have an impact on your adoption goals, so you want to make sure that you account for those. In terms of driving user adoption with data and functionality, you want to make sure that as part of your overall process to ensure that things move smoothly for your users, that you establish a reasonable archival or data aging strategy. And this is important because you want to make sure that when the users use the system, they have an expectation of how much data is going to exist. So, for example, you may not need to bring 15 years of history into your Dynamics 365 system. You may only need to use one or two, but you want to have that strategy ahead of time so that you can begin to set expectations with your users. You want to make sure that you also consider your master data management strategy or data hub strategy in terms of where the actual information lives as what we call the system of record. So, for example, customer data for large companies that have many systems that touch customer data, they will sometimes have what we call a customer hub, and that's where the customer data is surfaced externally to all other systems and is driven from a master data management perspective, and all inputs come in and are balanced, and then that information is pushed out to corresponding systems. You want to make sure that you consider what your existing business data looks like. And this is important because a lot of times over time, as systems age, data gets in there that from various changes may have changed along the way in terms of how it looks, how it's formatted, the quality of that data. So you always want to consider up front as part of this, that validating that data and ensuring that it's where the problem areas lie and how you'll correct those. And then, of course, as part of that, you would want to consider your data scrubbing and enrichment strategy for how you look at your data, how you need to change it, how you need to clean it, how you need to prepare it to migrate into the new system. Sometimes that includes, with a change in a business process or changing how you store data or changing a system of records, you may need to enrich your existing business data as you migrate that into Dynamics 365. And then, of course, look at external data, enterprise data warehousing, where maybe you're pushing data off to external reporting systems, and what that looks like. And the reason that that's important is that just provides you continuity of business information out of the EDW when you transition systems. You want to make sure that the data in the system really is what the users are expecting to see, usually cleaner or better, of course, and then that it's there, and of course, ultimately, that it's the quality that it needs to be. In terms of continuing to drive data and functionality for user adoption, you want to make sure that business processes and functionality really are aligned to whatever the users are expecting to see. This is partly handled in the discovery phase. It's also handled post-discovery through communication and training and those types of things. You don't want to show them one thing and then 6 months later have it be completely different than they're expecting, because then, of course, that sometimes user adoption challenges. You want to make sure that if there are line of business applications that the system needs to interact with, that those line of business application integrations exist and that they are providing the information that the users expect. In terms of reporting, you want to make sure that that you provide reporting options to the users based on what their requirements are. There are capabilities within Dynamics 365 for users to create their own reports, their own views, their own dashboards, those types of things. You also want to consider up front creating reports and dashboards that give the users actionable data points that help facilitate become part of the business process. So, for example, when a salesperson logs into the system, they may see, here are the meetings that you have scheduled in the next 3 days. Here are the phone calls that you need to make. Here is your current view of opportunities. In terms of opportunities that you have open, here are some ones that are, getting to a certain age that may need to be addressed, and give them the ability to then action that. As part of that, you also want to make sure that you bring all of that into the user training experience so that when they hit the ground running day one, these things are there as they expect, and they're able to then interact with it accordingly. You may also want to look at options such as Power BI from an enterprise and a self-service analytics perspective to ensure that the users have appropriate capability to leverage the information that they need to leverage. Not all of reporting and analytics has to be handled within the Dynamics 365 infrastructure. You can leverage tools such as Power BI to help facilitate that. And then lastly, for a privacy and collaboration perspective, more user-focused, of course, than system-focused, we'll assume that any regulatory compliance and privacy issues your team is going to deal with. But from an end-user perspective, you want to make sure that the user provides the appropriate level of security for the information that they're entering. So, for example, if I'm an account rep and I know that I have to be cognizant of the fact that, we may be doing business with, competitors in different segments. I don't necessarily want the account team from the other segment to be able to see my information, nor should I be able to see theirs. And that's a realistic expectation. But I can also collaborate with peers on my team and share information with them in an easy way so that it's not cumbersome for me to do that. Looking at usability in terms of how that can drive adoption, one of the key areas that we find that people struggle with is navigation. This is important because you want to make sure that your users have basic Dynamics 365 navigation concepts as part of their training. So if you were to look at a Dynamics 365 form, there are different elements on the form that are there to simplify the navigation process and avoid a lot of different clicks and going back and forth. Most recently used as a good example where you can look at as an end user, here are the records that I have touched most recently, and this keeps me from having to go back to a view, scroll through the view to find the record, or do a search to find a record, then click on the record. If this is a record I use most often, I can use the most recently view, what we call the caret, to look at that. In terms of looking at associated records, instead of having to navigate to a different view or scroll down and find a subgrid, I can also click on the expansion tab next to the name of the record that I'm on, and I can look at all of the types of associated records and just go right to them from there. Those are things that are important in terms of understanding the tools that Dynamics 365 provides out of the box to help facilitate and ease navigation. Another thing that you want to make sure that you do is create user experiences that align with how users work. This is important because when a user sits down to do their work during the day, there's a lot of different things that they may be doing as part of their job. And you want to make sure that your process that you're designing and that you're implementing in Dynamics 365 enables that, it doesn't disable it or make it more complex. So those are the types of things that you have to consider when creating forms, when creating dashboards, when creating reports, those types of things. All of that works in together with that overall experience that the user has as part of their day. Another thing that you can do to make navigation easier and to just generally understand better the system is to create specific learning path content. Now, learning path is our guided help system that comes with Dynamics 365 that you have the ability to enable, which then allows you to create content that is very specific and is contextual to what the user is doing. So, for example, if I'm on an opportunity form, I can create content in Learning Path that guides the user through the process that I want them to follow in terms of how to do things with the opportunity. It can be very specific to where they are on a form. It can also be related to where they are in a process. These types of things make Learning Path very valuable and also help really drive positive adoption experiences because it reduces the amount of time that they have to go to somebody else and ask questions. It reduces the amount of time they have to spend on the phone with the help desk if there's something they don't understand. Also, you may want to consider using app modules to design very specific app-based experiences. So, for example, if I am constantly in my activities, as an example, maybe I want to create an application that will always just take me straight to my activities and not force me to go into the system, go bounce around, get to the activities, or pull up a dashboard that may have my activities on it and then go to there. The app will always take me right to my activities and give me the view that I'm expecting to see. Excuse me. You want to also consider in terms of usability, Dynamics 365 and Outlook. You want to make sure that you determine an appropriate Outlook integration strategy. And by this, are you in the middle of an Office 365 migration? If so, you may want to try and align with that. Do I want to use the Outlook client or do I want to use the app for Outlook? Now, all the experiences that we're driving forward will be based on the app for Outlook because that functionality is available in mobile, it's available in OA, and it's available in Outlook itself. So those are the types of things that you have to think about in terms of, when your users use Outlook as part of their process, what is the strategy that you're going to use to make sure that they have the best capabilities they have to interact between Outlook and Dynamics 365. And of course, you want to make sure that you include all of that Outlook interaction as part of the training that you provide to your end users. Another area of usability is mobility. And this is important. You want to make sure that before the users ever get on, that everything has been worked out in terms of how the device management strategy is going to work, whether it's bring your own device or corporate provided devices. You want to make sure that the mobile experiences are consistent so that everything, it works the same from when they're in the web form, when they're on the phone, when they're on a tablet, when they're on their laptop, excuse me, and you want to make sure that the mobile experience is responsive. And for those of you who may not know, responsive in terms of what we call the modern web experience is not related to performance. It's related to ensuring that that the forms are appropriate for the medium in which they're being viewed. So my mobile form works to my mobile form, but presents me the same key information that I would see on my tablet. The tablet presents me at least the key information minimum with some expanded. Then the web experience is the same, focusing on the key information and then more expanded information. So those are the things that you want to consider in terms of creating a responsive experience from a mobility perspective. And then again, as part of your end user training, you want to make sure that you're also including your mobile experiences so that your users are prepared for that. And lastly, but absolutely not least, is accessibility. Accessibility is key. You want to make sure that you understand your accessibility requirements up front and that you take those into consideration for your user base. And then, of course, you want to make sure that you're always validating and verifying accessibility at each stage of your testing to ensure that there are no surprises when you deploy, which will also help you drive adoption. In terms of reliability and performance for adoption, one of the key things is, of course, system responsiveness. So you want to make sure that from a system perspective, you've taken care of any internal network barriers that may impact how the users access the system. They could be accessing it from home. They could be accessing it, again, from their mobile device, or they could be accessing it from a laptop. They could be accessing it from customer locations, or they could be accessing it internally. You want to continually monitor and assess the application responsiveness or performance, looking at form load times, how long it takes to save a record, how long it takes to do a lookup of information, how long it takes to bring up a view, how many clicks does it take to get to different types of information. You also want to make sure when you're looking at responsiveness that when the system functionality is being designed, that you minimize any synchronous integration activities that happen as part of the user experience. So, for example, if you need to go to a line of business system to pull in information and display that on a form, you want to make sure that you take into consideration the amount of time that takes and account for that as part of the user experience and do what you can to keep those to an absolute minimum. Is it information that can be retrieved periodically? How dynamic is it? Those types of things. And then lastly, of course, you want to make sure that you validate performance from different areas of egress. So, for example, what does the performance look like when I access it from home versus the office versus on my mobile device? Is there a difference in accessing it via Wi-Fi in the office versus a direct Ethernet connection? Those things are important. Also, in terms of monitoring reliability, it's important to understand the service and change alerts. You want to make sure that your system administrators are monitoring the service health dashboard and the notifications that are posted there. And this is important because you want to make sure that when there's going to be planned maintenance or unplanned maintenance windows that are put out in terms of 365 from a service perspective, or potentially if there's an outage that's going on, a notification goes to the service health dashboard. You want to make sure that you've got ways of checking on that and then, of course, communicating it to your organization. In terms of making sure that the experience is as robust as possible, you want to make sure that you have mitigation plans in place for any of your line of business integrations so that if there is a failure, you do have the ability to account for that. So, for example, a synchronous integration that pulls information from a line of business system should be able to notify the end user that piece of information is currently not available and that they can continue on with their process. And try to avoid any specific single points of failure because of that information. You also want to be able to assess how those outages affect your user experience, and again, you want to make sure that you have plans in place either through guided help or through effective erroring to make sure that the user understands what to do. And of course, you want to make sure when you're providing error messages to your users that they are user-friendly and descriptive, that there's guidance on what the user needs to do for the next best action, whether it's to contact the help desk, whether they need to just refresh their web page or clear their cache. You want to make sure that when you're communicating this information to your users as part of their training, and then, of course, in subsequent communication plans, you want to make sure that you include known issues with both Dynamics 365 itself and potentially internally to your to your application. And this is important because if a user knows that they're going to have an error for a period of time post-implementation with a particular thing, but they also know that there's a path to fix it, a lot of times that makes the user adoption easier, and it reduces the level of user frustration because it's something that they're expecting to see. They don't necessarily want to expect to see errors, but at least if you set the expectation with them, of course, it makes it much easier to address. When you the last area here, the last key area that we focus on is adoption enablement. The reason that this is important is because we want to make sure that when you work with your users, that you want to really motivate them to use the system. A lot of people have talked in the past about what they call the carrot and the stick philosophy. There are a lot of new ways to really incent users to use things in a way that makes it fun for them, that makes it challenging. And one of the ways that we've been working with some of our user base on it is using gamification. We actually provide a whole gamification module and service as part of what we do. A lot of times it's used to incent sales and incent sales activity, but it can also be used to incent adoption. And that's another way to keep users motivated. So for example, if a particular team has 100% adoption, maybe they get a reward, and that can be tracked through gamification, or it can be tracked through just monitoring KPIs and metrics. You want to make sure that users are aware of the value, really just educating them on the types of things that are being implemented and how using those things not only helps them but helps the company to be successful. Ultimately, and just bringing awareness to that, a lot of times that will help drive some of your base user adoption as well. You want to make sure that when you set adoption goals and usage expectations, that they are agreed upon. So you want to make sure that the stakeholders for the different areas of the business that will be using the system, agree with the goals and usage expectations that are set, so that they can help drive those and enforce those adoption goals to really help you reach that level of adoption that you need to ensure a truly successful implementation. And then lastly, of course, you want to make sure that you keep your business users engaged. One of the key things that I've learned over doing this for as long as I've done it is that it makes your end users feel, I don't want to say important, but it really helps them. It really makes them feel engaged when they provide feedback on a particular piece of functionality, or something that could be improved. And not only do they see that feedback is out there, so there's a mechanism by which that feedback can be solicited and is visible and can even be discussed amongst your end user community, but then of course you can highlight when those types of changes are pushed back out into your release cycles, to then let your users become aware that, hey, we hear you, we agree, here's what we've done, and then that validates their engagement, and it continues to support that engagement as you go forward. In terms of messaging and communicating from an executive perspective, you want to make sure that the impact on your success KPIs is clearly defined, and that how the usage is continuing to impact those success KPIs. You also want to make sure that users throughout the project receive regular communications, even during the planning phases, during discovery, all the way through a program. You want to make sure that you're engaging your users in the process, that ultimately everything that's going on is all about them, to make them more successful. Having that level of communication a lot of times builds you an entire base of people who are excited about what's coming, and it allows you to create excitement, and allows you to help get some of that, get people over that initial adoption hump, because now they're excited. They really want to see what's coming and the changes that it's going to bring. And then, of course, you want to make sure that your executives are regularly messaging out to your user community, talking about the new implementation and the new system that's coming, and the impact that they're hoping it's going to have on the business. This is also very positive because it shows that executive engagement, and it creates that connection between your end user community and your executives, and everyone being excited about your new system. And then, of course, with training and support, you want to make sure that you create a community of your early adopters and power users. These are the people who are going to almost be subject matter experts on the new system when you deploy for their business groups. You also want to make sure that you have user training that is both effective and responsive to the needs of your end user community, that there's a knowledge base available to help people see information about the system, not only about Dynamics 365 in general, but even more specifically to the types of things that are going to be implemented, screenshots, wireframes, those types of things to get people excited about what's coming and to kind of get that information encapsulated in certain knowledge areas. And then, of course, you want to make sure that you have your internal help desk that really understands the Dynamics 365 implementation, so that when your users call for help, they're getting pointed and guided assistance that's really going to help them get things resolved quickly and get moving forward. And then lastly, of course, you want to make sure that you define a strategy on terms of how you provide support for your application once you've deployed. And this is critical because ultimately, all the different areas of that support would include your own internal support, your levels of support, and then, of course, whether you would need to go to Microsoft support or your partner support, those types of things. And those are areas that are also critically important. So how do you measure adoption? So we actually provide, within the system, we provide a capability called organizational insights. And this is a solution that you can install that can be installed into your Dynamics 365 instance that will allow you reporting capabilities on the usage. So it'll show you active users, it'll show you number of API calls, and there's a lot of different pieces of information that you can gather from this. There is also ways that you can expand some of this information. And of course, as we continue to expand the capabilities in this area, we'll continue to put more information out in the organizational insights so that you'll get even more detailed information on errors, for example. So if you have a level 2 or a level 3 help desk, when that user is communicating with that help desk support person, they can actually go to organizational insights and begin to see errors where users may have run into a particular type of error. That also helps in reducing the amount of time that it takes sometimes to resolve issues because it's quickly and easily identifiable and available to find that information. Now, not all of that is there yet, but as we move forward, those types of things are going to continue to be put into our Organization Insights dashboard. So how can Fast Track help? This is one area where, again, Fast Track has been technically oriented for the most part as we've worked with our different customers on implementations, from the point of beginning your implementation through your deployment phase. And we provide a lot of very pointed and technical information. We do have a lot of technical, what we call tech talks, which is part of what this is today. And we have workshops that are more hands-on and interactive. But the idea being that, as I mentioned before, we have a wide span of customers. Not all customers have partners. Not all customers have customer success managers. So in those cases, we want to be available to help you with questions and concerns and needs that you may have regarding adoption. So in looking at ways that Fast Track can help you in each of these key areas, just to give you a quick note on the key. So if it's green, it's something that's currently covered as part of a Fast Track Tech Talk or workshop session. And if it's blue, these are things that can be discussed on the weekly Fast Track touch point, and we can provide guidance to you in a discussion framework. So for business value, we can certainly discuss with you the success KPIs that you would create. This is also where, in this particular area, if you had a customer success manager, you would do what they call a success planning workshop where these types of things would be addressed. But from a Fast Track perspective, we can certainly discuss with you your success KPIs for your implementation and what you're looking at and your expectations. We have a tech talk that we offer. It's called Getting the Most Out of CRM. And it really talks about the different areas of functionality. And of course, we can tailor that tech talk to the type of implementation that you're doing. So for example, if you're doing a sales implementation but not customer service, we wouldn't focus on customer service functionality in that discussion, we would just talk about the sales functionality and drill into that based on the needs of your implementation. We also can provide a Dynamics 365 product roadmap session. This kind of gives you an expectation of what's coming in the product. You can balance this against the types of functionality that you'd like to have in your implementation and how you would begin to bring that functionality in. From a roadmap perspective, you can see when we're planning to release certain functionality and begin to make that part of your implementation and roadmap plan for how you begin to drive functionality. And it could be further out than your initial deploy. It could be in a successive deploy somewhere along the way. And then, of course, how do you really get the most value out of Dynamics 365 and understanding the capabilities that we're putting into the user experience and leverage those? And again, that's more discussion oriented in nature, but certainly something that, through a combination of doing, bringing up an interactive session and kind of walking through with you, we can talk through some of those capabilities based on what you're looking to do from a business outcome perspective. For data and functionality, we have a data migration workshop that actually talks to you about the concepts of data migration, the things you need to take into consideration for doing data migration, and provide that tech talk to you. And then, of course, we can discuss in more detail the types of challenges that you may face or the things that you see. We can talk about business processes. How would you look at a business process to try and simplify a business process that currently may have a lot of complex branches, and is that really what it needs to be the most efficient and effective business process that you can design? Also, we have a security modeling workshop that actually talks about how to set up your system security within Dynamics 365 to control data visibility and to make sure that you have the appropriate data visible to the appropriate user groups, and that you're controlling that from the way that you set up security roles and those types of things within Dynamics 365 to do that successfully. And then, of course, we can talk about how do you potentially leverage data insights using Power BI and other things that you could do from a reporting perspective. For usability, certainly we can provide guidance around positive user experiences and the things that we've seen in working with other customers. How do you leverage Learning Path to make your user experience more productive? How do you create the content so that it's more targeted and guided? Of course, we also provide an integration workshop that talks about using Office groups, Yammer, and of course the app for Outlook. And then how would you improve the usability just in terms of considering form and process design? And this is something that you want to look at up front, of course, because these are the types of things that drive your discovery processes and the types of information that you get out of there. And then, of course, we have a tech talk that's part of what we're doing here, but actually there's some additional pieces that talk about looking at your current user experience and your current adoption and things that you might be able to do to help drive that even further than where you are. Looking at reliability and performance, we offer a tech talk and a workshop on optimizing your performance within your implementation, and we can provide very pointed guidance and detailed information around the performance metrics that we see in our back-end systems and provide you some additional telemetry and, of course, error reporting information as well. Another thing here is we can talk to you about ways that you can assess potential network issues, whether you're dealing with what we call network latency, or is it, potentially there are some things that have to be done for your networking team to make sure that your Dynamics 365 experience is whitelisted or able to go all the way through out to the cloud and come back as efficiently as possible. Trusting that information internally so that you're not slowing it down with a lot of additional inspection. We can also provide tech talks and workshops for code reviews. Now, these are fairly high level, but certainly there are, if there are certain scenarios that you'd like us to help take a look at, we can certainly provide some guidance from a code review perspective. And then, of course, we want to make sure that we can give you good guidance through conversations on our touch points around how do you make sure that your notification processes for your end user community are able to address the maintenance windows and known issues we talked about before. And then, of course, in terms of looking at how do we enable adoption and how do we help you to be more successful in your adoption, there are things that we can talk to you about, like training content and guidance. So we do have a training toolkit, and I'll mention that at the end of this session and how you can get to that. We also can talk to you about the types of communication that you send out to your users, potentially provide you some templates and some suggestions on how to do that more effectively. We could talk with you about your support strategy and the types of support that you're going to provide to your user community once you deploy. Of course, if you want to look at gamification, in terms of using gamification to not only potentially drive your sales activity, but to drive your adoption activity, we can certainly set up a discussion and provide a tech talk and workshop around gamification and the things that it can do to help you there. And then, of course, lastly, we want to make sure that you have the ability to create guided content and make sure that that's available for you. So as I mentioned before, here are some resources, and Debbie will confirm, I believe, that we will be providing this deck at the end of the session. Is that correct, Debbie?
Yep, we will.
So I think that what we'll be doing here is providing you these links, but you can actually go to these links. They're very easy to find. You can get to the training and adoption kit from the Help Center in Dynamics 365, but these are just three basic areas where you can go to see the training and adoption kit. This provides what we call templated user guides that you can actually go through and create with your logos and your information, and then enhance it, of course, with your screenshots for your specific functionality. It just gives you a set of template documents to work with to provide to your users as part of your training process. And then, of course, the Dynamics Help Center, this is really the place to go for pretty much any questions around Dynamics 365. There's also a developer center, which that link is off of the Help Center as well. There's information targeted for your system administrators and IT pros. There's business user-oriented information there. This gives you access to videos. There's tons of content out here. There are ebooks and videos. Of course, there's documentation links into our documentation system as well that provide a lot of very useful information. And of course, lastly, our roadmap site. This is a great place to go to understand the things that we're currently working on kind of in a 6-month window. Plus, you can go back and look at all of the previous deployments or releases of Dynamics 365, and you can see all of the things that have been released. And there's a lot of additional content for that type of feature and functionality as well. So with that, I certainly am now going to open the floor to question and answer and see if we have any questions. Debbie, are there any questions?
At this point, no. We did have somebody asking about getting a copy of the presentation deck, and we'll work on that. I did post those links from slide 17 as a broadcast announcement, so those are on there as well. But otherwise, no questions. So if you want to go ahead and give us some final thoughts, we will go ahead and conclude our recording today.
We'll do that. So I hope that you've been able to get good information out of this session related to how Fast Track can help you drive user adoption. And then maybe the information in this has provided you with some starting points to begin to look at your user adoption. Certainly, this is a key area to make sure that your Dynamics 365 implementation is successful. So I hope that you've been able to get value out of this. We certainly appreciate your feedback. Please make sure to respond to the survey and do all these things that will let us know if we're giving you the information that you need. And of course, I look forward to seeing you out there in the trenches. Thank you all very much.
All right. Thanks, Chris. So ladies and gentlemen, I would like to call your attention to the survey link that I posted there in the messages window. We appreciate you taking a moment to fill it out prior to logging out. Click the link, enter your email, you'll be taken into the survey. There are 5 questions, and our voting scale is on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being the best score possible. Be sure to click on the submit button at the bottom to ensure that your feedback has been received. And with that does conclude today's Learning Media web conference. Again, the session recording will be available at the same registration site within 24 hours. I'd like to extend a big thank you to our presenter, Chris, and thank you, audience, for logging in and joining us today.